What's up, family, and welcome back to the channel for I believe this is our 15th episode of Bible study with an ex-pastor. And these just have been absolutely phenomenal. I haven't kind of given this spiel in a while, but I feel like I need to. Just as a reminder, these aren't necessarily a deep theological dive. And of course, I've never said this part, but I think it probably needs to be said, nor am I necessarily trying to tell you what to believe about the Bible. This instead is more like a trip down memory lane. I'm going back through some of these scriptures, reading them with fresh eyes, and then also reminiscing on some of the things that I thought about these things when I was younger, when I was a pastor, when I was on the fringes, and now that I'm a full on atheist, non believer, secular humanist, all that jazz. And so I'm super duper excited. Man, we've just had an incredible week. Of course, a few weeks ago I was in Cali. That was bittersweet away from my family, but just an incredible opportunity. So we're still awaiting news about how that documentary experience is going to go. And so the more information I get, I'll definitely share that with you all. But also, aside from doing these weekly, sometimes weekly Bible studies, we've also started doing Sundays that we're actually doing live. There's Sunday sessions where we're just having conversations around building community. And right now we're in a conversation series called How to Human, where we're exploring this idea of what it actually means to be human and really to be humane towards each other, right? And using empathy as that tool. We've been having some incredible conversations, and not only have we been having incredible conversations there, we've been able to move some of those conversations onto Discord. Yes, I'm finally getting involved in Discord. So we've been able to move some of those conversations in Discord, which is absolutely beautiful because it is allowing us to start building more community in real time. And I'd love for those of you out there who are watching it to definitely be a part of it. And so you're going to see some new links and stuff in our description. So check those out. You will see all types of forms that show you how to get involved and to get actively involved. That's for those of you who want to volunteer. And for those of you who maybe want to experiment with building community right where you are. So you will have all of those options, and you will see those in the description below. Okay. There is something else I wanted to show you before we jumped into actually today's today's chapter, if you will. But if you avert your eyes to the screen, which is where they should be anyway, right? You will notice this is a map. Everywhere you see a point is somewhere that we have either someone who's officially a member of what we're doing, of our online community, which is Bridge City, or a member or partner with our larger organization called The Bridge, which means they're building community where they are they just a supporter of everything that we're doing on this channel. Every pinpoint you see on this map is a place where we've kind of reached into. And so that's beautiful. That's the power of technology, and that's the power of just having authentic conversation. And I can't wait to see these little pinpoints pop up everywhere. And just for your record, we're actually doing this for those people who are a part of our community and those people who are looking for community, as of ways to know where community is. We'll also be using it as an internal tool to keep keep a good eye on how many people we have growing in any collective area, so we can make sure that they're getting to know each other and helping support community where they are. So that's really awesome, and I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so have I said everything that I wanted to say before jumping in? Nope, there's one more thing. Check this out. Okay, so few weeks ago, and I've shared this story in probably almost every live or premiere video I've been doing, because that's how excited I am about this upcoming project. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be on Skeptic Haven alongside Dr. Darrell Ray from Recovering from Religion, and we had an awesome time taking calls, and one of those calls came from someone who was, on the other side of deconstruction, but still dealing with the fear of hell and some things along that nature. And we were able to give this person some, I think, highly pragmatic and, if I can use the word, powerful advice. And we actually shared a very real human moment there that often gets isolated to church or spookism or mysticism. And so I've reached out to a friend of mine who is also an ex-pastor and an atheist to collaborate on this new project that we're calling the Ex-Pastor Call-In Show. And as of now, it is the world's only ex-pastor call-in show. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. We'll be launching that in the first month of July. That didn't come out right. We'll be launching that the first Sunday of July at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And from there, we'll be going every first Sunday of every month until we decide if we've picked up enough momentum to go more than that. So if that's something you're interested in and that's something you want to see more of, mind you, this will not be a debate show. And I am not against debate shows. I'm looking forward to participating in a few. But this will not be a debate call-in show. This will be a call-in show, hopefully, where we can get people call in who really want some advice, who really want some help, maybe they just want to be affirmed. Who knows? But me and my friend, we're going to be taking all of this pastoral energy that we've had from all of these years that has now been corrected, we believe, by critical thinking and engaging the world as secular humanists to see if we can provide something of value, right? And so if you're excited about that, please let me know in the chat because we are premiering this, and in the comments because that helps the algorithm. So let's do both. All right. All right. So I think we can pretty much get ready to kind of jump into today's chapter. I do not call this a lesson because I'm not necessarily sharing any lessons in this. Nor is that necessarily my goal. My goal is really just to share my experiences, and if you can pull some value from that, I'm super excited about that. There are things that I do teach, and there are things that I do, like, oh, these are lessons. But even those things, I don't know if I'm going to be doing a lot of that per se on YouTube for a lot of reasons. Number one, I don't want to devalue those lessons, if that makes sense. And besides, all of this stuff is free and it's great anyway, right? I think it's great, or at least it's fun. It's fun. But so I don't want to call this a lesson. That was the long way around that. If you haven't already liked the video, subscribe to the channel, consider joining our community either through Patreon or through the YouTube membership program. And of course, again, we are on Discord now, so that's a great place to connect and kind of grow with us in real time. Both my wife and I are on there, and we're doing our best to engage. And we're also building a team of volunteers that's going to make these things kind of flow like butter on pancakes with some syrup. Wow, that just made me really hungry. Um, yeah, and yes, and speaking of building a team of volunteers, consider volunteering. There are ways to do that. We have some forms now that I mentioned earlier in the description. Check those out, and you can also get connected through our website dldd.us. Even though those forms are more so, the form on the website are more so targeted towards volunteering for the channel, and the forms in the description are volunteering for the community. But there's going to be a lot of overlap there anyway. Let me see here. Okay. Oh yeah, and we have merch. Check out the merch. We have great merch. Okay, so let's jump in this. Today we're jumping into Genesis chapter 30. And this is where things start getting good because we are now getting to the place where in the text where the sons of Israel are being established. A few of these sons, which will later be kind of like the patriarchs for tribes, have already been born. And in this chapter, the rest of them are going to be born, which will ultimately get us to the story of Joseph, which Joseph is the last story in Genesis. Pretty much everything in Genesis is designed to, or at least from my perspective, and mind you, admittedly, my perspective is based on urban Christology, somewhat. I've deviated from urban Christology a long way, but that was still the baby that a lot of my concepts were born into. So for those of you who've been on this journey with us for a while, I always stress the importance of wanting feedback from Hebraic scholars, or even Canaanitic scholars. I'd actually prefer Canaanitic scholars in that sense, because you're not connected with any religious belief, and you can kind of give me cultural information, which is what I find highly valuable and informative when it comes to stuff like this. And admittedly, and this is one of the things that I've pointed out over and over again, that I found to be quite disingenuous about urban preaching, is that urban preaching was not rooted in any type of academic understanding of Hebraic or Canaanitic culture. So when I say that the whole book of Genesis points to Joseph, I speak to that solely from a narrative that does have this presupposition of univocality, which one of the things you do begin to understand from the once you've separated yourself from the faith, is that the book is not necessarily univocal, right? And so that doesn't necessarily change the flow of the narrative, but it does challenge the narrative in many ways. And so I want to be careful when I say some of those things, because I am not trying to necessarily make authoritative claims about this book. If anything, I'm trying to encourage us to learn how to embrace this book as literature in some ways that are very irreverent, and also in ways that bring a greater appreciation to the human work that went into this, and the human ideals that surround this, the not so good ones and the not so bad ones, because it's a mixed bag. But anyway, the entire book of Genesis, from that perspective, then, is ultimately leading up to Joseph's story, because Joseph's story is absolutely necessary for the Exodus. And I want you to notice this. Genesis, I think is 1 through 37, and I may be wrong there, but Genesis 1 through 37 is ultimately this fast track through history, you know, to get to this stopping point where you spend almost between 7 to 10 chapters telling this one family's story. And ultimately, that's Jacob's story, Israel's story. And it's really to get us to, of course, introduce us to these 12 sons of Israel, introduce us to Joseph, and then establish Joseph as the reason. Um, establish Joseph as the reason for the predicament that we witness in the Exodus. One way that I used to say it is that Moses inherited Joseph's problem. And so, yes, Joseph, gets, and we're going to get into that story, but Joseph, while in Egypt, rises into great power, brings his family over there into that great power. But then eventually a Pharaoh rises who does not know Joseph. And these people end up getting lost in the sauce, according to the narrative. Now, I'll have plenty to say about the Exodus narrative once we get there. But at one point, when I was definitely in the faith, I preached a lot about Joseph. First, very very flattering of Joseph, and then on the other end, very questionable of Joseph. Seeing that Joseph he's the doorway of his people into slavery, and so I realized there's another way to look at this story, and possibly some of the earlier Hebraic writers also considered it that way, because God is identified as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It stops there. It's not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So it's very interesting. And again, that was definitely some fringe stuff. But as you've heard me say, it's all fringe at the end of the day. So let's have a little fun. Let's jump into this. Get you something to drink. Get you a little wine. Get you a little liquor, whatever you got. Get you something to smoke on. Get you something to chew on. Get you somebody to love on. However you flow, however you roll. Let's jump into Bible study with the next pastor. Here we go. Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. Now, when Rachel saw that she had not borne Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I'm going to die." Melodramatic much. Wow. I mean, like that's pretty damn extreme. But I did want to, before we even moved any further, kind of highlight this reminder, because we ended on a powerful point with Leah's story last week, right? Where we realized that baby girl got to the point where she was pretty much just like, "F you," like I don't need I don't need, because at first she was like, give me babies and so you'll love me. And then after a while, she was like, forget it. I don't need babies from you. I don't need love from you. I'm gonna be okay. And so now we see the flip side of that, where Rachel, even though Leah has had this breakthrough moment where it's like, I don't care anymore. Rachel is on the other side, seeing Leah have all these children and has become jealous of her sister, not because she has any extra relationship with Jacob, because that's obviously that she doesn't, but it is this idea that she has children from you and I don't. And it's funny because these are still very primitive ideologies, but I still see jealousies like this play out even today, and it's heartbreaking at times. But I do see quite a few young sisters who are still like that. No, like no, she got your child and I ain't got your child. I want one of your children too, and I'd be like, oh okay. But and so she says, give me children or else I'm going to die. If you don't give me children, I'm gonna be dead. Now, of course, I call this out as melodramatic. Again, there may be a poetic element here where she is not literally saying I'm going to die, but she's saying that when I do die, that there will be no one else here who is me or has a part of me in them, which is very interesting because there are plenty of people who believe that that the people that these stories represent did not have a concept of women being a part, of their children, type of thing genetically. But if that is the poetic aspect, and I can't say authoritatively that it is, this is conjecture at this moment. But if that was the poetic context, then that would indicate that whoever the author is of this particular story um, had that type of understanding, So that's pretty interesting. Verse 2. Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Okay, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Okay. All right. Which interesting. This am I in the place of God? This is Jacob saying this. Joseph will use these exact same words later in a later chapter. So I do find that interesting because I remember wrestling with those words. Am I in the place of God? Like, what does that mean? And for those biblical scholars, you might already know where Joseph is wrestling with where Joseph is using those words at, and that is when his brothers are thinking that he's going to do something evil to them, and he says, am I in the place of God? Ultimately, what you meant for evil, God worked for my good, type of thing. And I was like, what does that mean? That was an earlier time in ministry. But anyway, we're not at that chapter yet, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. But Jacob is mad at Rachel for bringing this to him, because he's like, hey, I'm not the one that's done this to you. I ain't. I'm plowing away every chance I get. You know what I'm saying? So this ain't me that you need to be having a conversation with. I'm saying it that way because the text says he's angry. I'm thinking that's why he's angry, because you talking to him like he the one that did something. Because she's like, you need to give me children. Like, babe, I'm trying my best, but obviously I am not the giver of the children here. And so he's like, God is basically the problem here. God is the one that is withheld, from your womb, from you the fruit of the womb. Um, and then she said, well, here is my female slave, Bilhah. Have relations with her, that she may give birth on my knees, so that by her I too may obtain a child. And so this family this is a family trend, right? Because remember when Hagar, when Sarah does the same thing with Hagar, it says, hey, like, God says he's going to give me a child. I don't have a child. Let's go take the slave woman that we have. And Hagar was the first slave woman that we kind of saw this family have. And Hagar obviously left with Isaac. But I'm sorry, Ishmael. I hope I'm saying it. Yeah, Ishmael. But it makes you wonder, did Hagar leave some other children, some female children behind? Because this family has expanded in its amount of um, s- female slaves that are all, interestingly enough, slaves to the women. And that I don't know if this ever really gets talked about go through scripture, I mean, we typically think of slaves being owned by males because we also think of wives being owned by their property as well in many ways. But in this sense, these are the words here are very clear. Here is my female slave, and I did call this out in earlier chapters, and as well call this out with Sarah and Hagar as well. But again, there is a issue of slavery here, and not just slavery, but this is obviously sexual slavery, and unfortunately, this isn't a trend that decreases as these chapters and even books go on. Sexual slavery becomes more of a standard, especially in the conquest of the descendants of these children. But yeah, just wanted to take that little, a little pit stop there. That she may give birth on my knees. That's some Handmaid's Tale stuff. Oh yeah, because that's what Handmaid's Tale was kind of based on a little bit. So she gave him her slave, Bilhah, as a wife, and Jacob had relations with her. And like, this is how you know you're like, some of the defense that some Christians would give here is that, well, no. See, obviously, she gave him her slave as a wife. So that makes it okay. Like, that's when you know you're talking to a train that's not making it all the way to the station. Like, it may make it to the station on other runs, but on this particular run, this train isn't making it all the way to the station. And I actually encourage people, it's not going to be very useful to try to debate those people. In many cases, just by debating them, you are validating their foolishness by taking it seriously. So yeah, because that just from a human perspective, that should not be acceptable. No. She gave him as a wife, so it's okay now. No, that no way nullifies the fact that this is a slave and that you're giving somebody away against their own, will and admission, and you're planning on stealing their child. Yeah, see, you see how all that it's just a circle of hot mess, man. Okay, so then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me, and has indeed." Oh, I'm sorry. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then, because Jacob had relations with her, with her, he did not decline at all. He did not decline the I can't even call it an invitation. I don't know what to call it. But then Rachel said, God has vindicated me and has indeed heard my voice and has given me a son. Therefore, she named him Dan. Now, isn't that just like some believers? Here it is. God has done absolutely nothing. And you have gone and given yourself this blessing at the expense of somebody else's liberty, at the expense of someone else's autonomy, at the expense of somebody else's humanity. And then on the other side of that, you thank God for it. You literally say that it is through your treachery, through your violation of others, God has vindicated you. When you say things like this, there's not even a need to have there's not even a need to have a man hiding behind the curtain anymore, because you don't even need the man behind the curtain, because in this case, Rachel knows full well how this thing was orchestrated. And so this doesn't even seem like a genuine praise. You know what I'm saying? This definitely seems like, see how I did this? God has vindicated me. It seems villainous a little bit, you know? And Rachel's slave Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. So Rachel said, with mighty wrestling, I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed. And she named him Naphtali. And now again, now watch this. Rachel is so gone in the head. This girl has been damaged. She's so gone. She's imagining this battle with her sister, using her slave as the surrogate with her husband. And mind you, remember, we read last week's chapter, her sister has moved on from this man in her head. So Rachel is literally engaged with a battle with her own self-delusion, because likely life has been that traumatic for her. I feel bad for her. Uh-oh. Story just changed. Here we go. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her slave Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Now Leah's doing this bullshit. Just don't, come on. I thought Leah was over this. And Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, how fortunate. So she named him Gad. And Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. You learn so much about the mentality and the psychology of these characters through the way that they name, their children, which is actually a. I'm not just saying that facetiously. No, this is a thing in Scripture. These names have these type of meanings. That's why they're telling us that. They're literally trying to give us insight. From what I believe, they're literally trying to give us insight into what these women think. On what are on their minds. But it really is sad to see Leah regress in this manner, because we saw her have such an amazing breakthrough at the end of chapter 29, where she's like, "I'm done." But after seeing Rachel's antagonization, which I'm kind of, some of this is eisegesis here, but I'm just assuming that Rachel isn't just having these babies and being peaceful about it. I'm assuming Rachel is having her slave have babies and like, see, I can have babies too. Look, this is my baby. This is my baby. And then Leah said, "Oh, she thinks she's doing something." But then, of course, Leah is fertile, so she can have more babies if she wants to. But in this case, he's like, "I really don't want this man's babies, but you know what? Just to do what she doing, I'm gonna go get my slave and regress." And you just see, again, this is not a thing that's talked about in Scripture, but at least starting with Abraham, with Sarah, we see an increasing escalation of women violating other women throughout this text. It's not a popular thing to call out now, because for sure there is a lot of male violation of women throughout this text. Oh yeah, we're gonna deal with all of it, and we've been dealing with all of it that we've come across so far. We just dealt with the aspect of whatever his name is, Jacob. I have no respect for these people, but no. So there's a lot of it, but I just don't want this to be overlooked either. That these are women violating other women, and I do call that out. Just from a cultural perspective, I've seen things kind of play out this way, even with one of the videos I recorded earlier. It's one of the things that I've talked about. Oh yeah, when talking about the problem with biblical manhood and its audacity when it comes to biblical womanhood and defining what that means, and then the real damage of that is not just that this harms our society, but you end up getting women who end up training other women in these ideologies, and from what I've seen, the majority of people who really propagated these ideas in the communities that I grew up in were women, and so, but you see that here, it's these in these particular stories, it's not necessarily the men that say, "Hey, well, let me go ahead and get your slave girl then." Which of course these are men writers, so the men could just be justifying, which is kind of one of those things I thought about Noah's story with him sleeping with his daughters, or like, "Oh yeah, they came in and made me do it," "Oh, my wife gave me her slave." There is a really high plausibility that if these stories actually are written 100% by men, that the men are writing this in as a scapegoat. So that exists too. See, I do try. I try my best, and I hope y'all appreciate it. But I try my best to be very nuanced in these conversations and deliberations. All right, verse 14. Now, in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrake fruits in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrake." Okay, so we've been in competition all this time, and now you want my son you want me to give you some of my son's mandrakes. Like, why can't your son go get you some mandrakes? How rude. Leah probably perceived this as some type of superiority complex. But she said to her, "It is a small matter for you to take my husband, and would you take my son's mandrakes also?" I mean, you done already took my husband, which I get was supposed to be your husband first anyway. So like, I don't get this particular line of argument. Like, Rachel isn't the one who robbed you in this sense. And again, there it is. There's some more of that female on female violence. Rachel is just as much of a victim of this circumstance as you are. The only difference is she was the chosen victim. And you were the booby prize victim and you got given first. But either way, it's created this hostility between these two sisters as opposed to having a hostility towards Jacob or even a hostility towards their father, right? And none of that hostility that they have towards each other, and none of the sympathy that they have for the issues that they're feeling in life, have they found any way to share with their female slaves. Okay. Um, so Rachel said, therefore he may sleep with you tonight in return for your son. But she, okay. Huh. But she said to her, is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also? So Rachel said, therefore he may sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. I don't understand why Leah would even be happy about this because of what she stated in chapter 29. This is, or what the narrator stated in chapter 29. This is regression. I'm not liking Leah's journey here. When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must have relations with me, for I have indeed hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he slept with her that night. I don't know what part of this story doesn't sound like it's taking place in a seedy hotel by a crack alley. This is about as lowbrow as you get. You know, you sold your son's fruit for some dick for a man that you said you had moved on from. I'm, j- I'm, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. You know. Let me stop. So he slept with her that night. Like he just acting like he ain't got no choice in the matter, which again is kind of one of those things that highlights that the way this story is written does seem to be somewhat flattery of the male view, keeping the male almost clean-handed, not quite, but almost clean-handed every time there are these violation of women's and women. It's almost like, oh no, this it's all them. Because when you read the scripture, that's definitely, or when you read these chapters, that's definitely what kind of comes off like. Like these women are just like horrible people, and these men are just the bystanders, you know. And to be fair, there are some situations like that. There really are. I'd encourage you to read, you know, a few slave narratives. They're not all going to be like that, but you would not be hard pressed finding some slave narratives where it's like, oh snap, the woman is really like ruthless, you know, and the man is he's really nice to the dudes and just like sleeping with all the women. And I'm using nice very, 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 very liberally. And again, I stress this was not a common thing. It's just, or the nice part was not that common. And it's, I hate to do this, but it's the academic side of me. It's not as uncommon as people would think. Nothing is really as gray and white, as black and white as we want it to be, because people are highly complex, you know, highly complex, and it's almost aggravatingly complex at sometimes. But no, so even if this narrative was fabricated, there is are the types of things that which we know the narrative is fabricated, but even if these types of scenarios are complete fabrications from the writer's perspective, I often fear that because this has kind of settled into the moral consciousness of certain people groups, that these type of behaviors have not been taken on as archetypes for some. I shall continue. All right. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. So now it's back on her. Then Leah said, God has given me my reward because I have gave my slave to my husband. So she named him Issachar. Listen to her words. Leah says, God has given me my reward because I gave my slave to my husband. Now, I pointed out language like this before, For everybody who likes to say, no, the Bible doesn't say anything positive about slavery, but this is the second time that we've seen, and we're just in the first book of the Bible, but this is the second time where slavery and what someone can do with a slave is perceived by both the authors of this book, of this story, and the characters in the story as an undisputable blessing of God. All right, that's what this whole chapter is that God is blessing me through the decisions I make through my slave. That is the whole story of Hagar. But then not only that, when Abraham runs afoul of somebody in another country, one of the blessings that Abraham is given is more slaves. So the language is here. And, I try to call it out. There are a lot of things that people try to say are not in the Bible. People try to say, oh, no, there's no real slave support for slavery in the Bible. I'm like, what? People try to say there's no dehumanization of women in the Bible. I'm like, what? People try to say there's no prosperity message in the Bible. I'm like, what? No, it's all here. It's all here. Like, it's literally a smorgasbord of any message you want to pull from it. But that is not a unique thing. Almost all of literature, ancient and modern, that represents epic narratives, has a smorgasbord. I'm using it again, or as a bouquet. There's another word I want to use. A cornucopia. Yes, has a cornucopia of items that you can pull from it, of ideas that you can pull from it, and all can be supported. Yeah. Yeah, that's almost a standard amongst all epic works. Even if it's written by one person, the work itself can't be univocal because of its epic nature. It has to represent several character perspectives. That's just a little authorship stuff there. Okay, so let's keep going. So this is Issachar, and y'all remember the sons of Issachar. They know the times and stuff. They know what time it is. Oh, I'm gonna play with that one. Then Leah said, God has given. Oh, no, read that. And Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good gift. Finally, my husband will acknowledge me as his wife because I have borne him six sons. So she named him Zebulun. And first off, I'm just going to say that was a really, really odd name to go for. But beyond that, she's in full regression mode. She's all the way back where she was in the beginning of her story, which I think we kind of saw coming because I called it out last week. I said, I'm really proud that Sister Girl is out here striking on her own and that she's moving away from this brother, you know what I'm saying? And feeling that she needs this attachment from him for her self-worth and all that good stuff. But then I also acknowledge, but she still has this superstitious attachment to this God, and so I think in that case, that's what brought her right back, man. Brought her right back. You can't really worship the same God of the people who are oppressing you and not constantly find yourself in oppression. As a matter of fact, just by default, that's the only way you can make room for them and you in the theology. The only way that you can make room for them and you in the theology is to see a preference for them in the theology. So if you're going to share this theology and you're still going to believe that these people are approved by this theology, then you have to believe that these people had good reason or good right to mistreat you, and that perhaps what you're experiencing isn't mistreatment, but it is discipline, it is refinement, which there are quite a few people who believe such ludicrous things today. But that is typically the result of sharing an ideology with your oppressor. Yeah. Oh man, and then it's always going to put you in the position of the oppressed. People, typically, and this is just from a sociological religious study perspective. People who worship something that does not look like them are always oppressed people. People who begin to worship something that looks like them always liberate themselves. You know what happened? The tanner Jesus got, the freer Cuba got. And I get it, the word free there, depending on where you sit politically, but you know what I'm saying. Um, but yeah, there's a very interesting distinction there with when people take on ideologies of things that don't represent them. A lot of negative stuff happens, as we can see here. So afterwards, she gave birth to a daughter, named her Dinah. Oh, poor Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Oh, now God, after all of this, after they've run through the slaves, now God is saying, "Oh, well, now I'll give Rachel a babe." God could have God could have totally spared Zilpah and Bilhah. I don't even know if I'm saying their names right, but could have totally spared them, of being violated. There's no way around it. I was going to use the other word, but that might get this flagged. So, but just ultimately violated. Could have spared them by opening Rachel up from the very beginning, and that sounds kind of violative as well. That's not a word, but it is now. So she conceived and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." And that's just a sad. I'd hate to be the son named after that one. But that's really sad that this poor woman has to view herself that way. That I didn't have any grace in my life, or I had been disgraced in my life, not because of anything that I had done wrong, but simply because I had not bore a child yet. And as ancient and primitive as this ideology has been, there are several women that live under this type of pressure to this day. Today they call it the biological clock. That clock is, and the further there are women, especially in my community. The older you get, people start asking, you ain't had a child yet. How much longer is it gonna be? Do you have a child? And it really is sad that we've defined people in those ways, and sad that she's experiencing this as a character. And she named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord give me another son." This is Joseph. Verse 25, Jacob prospers. That's what this is named, you know. And again, of course, I don't think this part right here isn't necessarily in the initial writings, but this is how somebody labeled this. Somebody labeled this Jacob prospers, all right? So now when it came about when Rachel had given birth to Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away so that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you yourself know my service which I have rendered you." Which, mind you, Jacob has worked 14 years to get both women, and apparently has worked, well, no, I'm guessing he's having the babies throughout the whole 14 years. It's very interesting. So send me away. Yep. Verse 27. But Laban said to him, "If it pleases you at all, stay with me. I have determined by divination that the Lord has blessed me on your account." All right. So, all right, here it is. Divination is not a stranger to these people's belief systems represented in this story. It's not strange to the Old Testament, nor is it strange to in the New Testament. Apparently, these things are only wrong when they're not done by your in group, which is just tribalism. But yes, he says he has determined by divination. Just the same way they picked Matthias as a 13th apostle, which some people have excused by saying, well, he wasn't important anyway. Well, there's some of the 12 that wasn't important either. So I don't know what you do there. But no, he uses divination to determine that the Lord is blessed him, on his account. Which, funnily, let me let a little cat out the bag. You would be surprised at how many mega church pastors have relations with people who practice divination, whether they be, what we've colloquially call root workers, you know, things of that nature. You'd be surprised of how many mega church pastors take a yearly trek to visit a local root lady to get blessings spoke over them, to get divinations done, to figure out how to orchestrate their year. It's not as unique as you would think. But yeah, but obviously it kind of there are things in these scriptures that kind of support it. He continued, name your wages and I will give them. But Jacob said to him, you yourself know I have served you and how your livestock have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? So, Jacob is like, he says the same thing old dude said, God has blessed you since I've been here, but I want some of this for me too. Um, so he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from thee every speckled or spotted sheep, and every black sheep among the lambs, and the spotted or speckled among the goats, and those shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come concerning my wages. Everyone that is not speckled or spotted among the goats or black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. Laban said, good, let it be according to your word. So they come up with this deal. All right, I'm going to do a little bit more work for you, but the one thing that I want from you in exchange is I want all of these basically damaged goods, is basically how this story is kind of preached. I want all the things that there's something wrong with, so you get all the best of the best. And in that way you're good and I'm good. And Laban said, okay, good. This is good. And he goes on to say, so that way, if any of the ones that I have are not speckled or are not spotted, then I've stolen something. And because for whatever reason, when he's dealing with this guy, he wants to be really integral. Odd, right? So he removed on that day the stripped or spotted male goats and all the speckled or spotted female goats, everyone with white on it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and put them in the care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journeys between himself and Jacob fed, and he put a distance. Okay, so I guess that's Laban. And Laban put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar trees, strange fruit, almond, I will say almond, almond and plane trees, and peeled white strips in them, exposing the white that was in the rods. He set the rods which had peeled in front of the flocks in the drinking troughs, that is, in the watering channels where the flocks came to drink, and they made it when they came to drink. So the flocks made it by the rods, and the flocks delivered striped, speckled, and spotted offspring. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. So again, there's something mystical going on here with these rods. He has the rods by, and it's like if they mate by the rods, then genetics just do what genetics was going to do anyway. But apparently, this is supposed to be miraculous. Okay, so moreover, whenever the stronger of the flocks were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flock in the drinking trough so that they would mate by the rods. But when the flock was sickly, he did not put them in. So the sickly were Laban's and the strongers were Jacob. So there's some trickery going on here. So the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. They do not explain how he gets the female and male servants or the camels or the donkeys, but they do tell us how he basically kind of creates this idea to protect his integrity while it seems that his plan is to operate unintegrally with this, I don't know, mumbo jumbo with the rod thing going on. And the story ends up becoming he became exceedingly prosperous. And this is something I've called out before, because that's not the first time in these stories that we've seen that type of language, that exceedingly prosperous stuff. So that's where some of that prosperity gospel is coming from. I think we have time to make it through another chapter, so let's try to run through it real quick. This is chapter 31. Oh, it's longer than I thought. Let's see. Now Jacob heard. Can I do this with just a mouse? Yes. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father, he has made all this wealth. See, there it is again. He's made all of this wealth. And Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him, as it had been before. Likely, Laban is probably not, oh, okay. But Jacob probably figures this is fair because you tricked me into 14 years of servitude. Then the Lord said, Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. There's always this thing happening where God sends people to places that are, wait a minute. Jacob is with Laban. He is in the land of his fathers. This is so confusing. I'm sorry. When everywhere is the land of your father, it gets really dang complicated. So Jacob sent word and called Rachel and Leah to his flock in the field and said to them, I see your father's attitude, that it's not friendly toward me as it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. I didn't know anything about this 10 times. This is my first time hearing about that in this particular story. God did not allow him to do me. However, God did not allow him to do me no harm. Okay, see, this is very interesting. He can change my wages 10 times, but he's not doing me harm. No, that is economic harm. I don't. So, so I guess it's really easy to trick people who don't even know, when they're being tricked. And there's some historicity to that. There really is. If he said this, the speckle shall be your wages, then all the flock delivered speckle. And if he said this, the stripe shall be your wages, then all the flock delivered stripe. So God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. And it came, notice this is the same thing as mom did. God did this. You remember? She said, God has vindicated me. I didn't go take this slave woman and make my husband sleep with her or make her sleep with my husband and then take this child as my own. God did this. Jacob says, I'm not the one who orchestrated this whole trickery. God is taking away your father's livestock, like mother, like son. And it came about as the time when the flock was breeding that I raised my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats that were mating were striped, speckled, or mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. He said, now raise your eyes and see that all the male goats that are mating are striped, speckled, or mottled, for I've seen everything that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a memorial stone, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any share of inheritance in our father's house? Jacob just flat out lied. Because in chapter 30, it walks us through the story of what happens. Jacob just tells Jacob is the father of lies. Did I name one of these videos that before? I don't know. If I did, this one is going to have to be called Jacob is also the father of lies, because that's literally what he's doing. He literally just lied and just said, no, God did this. And let me tell you how God did this. And this very much contradicts what the narrator just said. That's interesting. That's interesting. Oh my goodness. I have so many thoughts. All right, so she says, the sisters are saying, the sister wives, are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has also entirely consumed, our purchase price. Surely all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob stood up and put his children and his wives on camels and drove away all his livestock and all his property, which he had acquired, the livestock he possessed, which he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his flock, and Rachel stole the household idols that were her father's. Why is she stealing her father's idols? I don't know. And I'm very curious to what these idols were, because Laban at times speaks of Jacob's God, or at least speaks of the Lord. So he speaks of Adonai or Yahweh or whoever. He's speaking of the same God that Jacob is speaking of. So I wonder what these household idols are. And likely they are household idols of Adonai or El in many ways. Or yeah. And so and Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean. Now it's no longer Jacob, his uncle, by not telling him that he was fleeing. So there's a bunch of deception and thievery going on here. So he fled with all that he had, and he got up and crossed the Euphrates River and set out for the hill country of Gilead. So I guess this placement kind of tells where they are. They're crossing the Euphrates, going towards Gilead. When Laban was informed on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days' journey and overtook him in the hill of the county of Gilead. Now, in this case, I wasn't 100% sure why they were running, nor was I 100% sure why Laban was chasing. You know, even the way Jacob does this deal, it seems that Laban would be none the wiser, you know. But apparently Laban has figured some things out, or either that, or just Laban had never had any intention of letting Jacob leave in the first place. There's so many criminals involved in this story that it's absolutely hard to pinpoint if anybody's actually trying to do right by the other person. So however, God came to Laban in a dream of the night and said to him, "Be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad." God shows up and defends Jacob's treachery in the same way that he defended Isaac's treachery, and in the same way that he defended Abraham's treachery. God seems to be a defender of the treacherous. Um, And Laban caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped in the hill country of Gilead. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword?" Now I thought God told Laban, "Don't say anything, good or bad." But he says something, obviously. "Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy and with songs, with tambourine and with lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my grandchildren and my daughters? Now you've done foolishly." I feel like Laban is lying here. "It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob.'" But he's speaking to Jacob. "Now you have indeed gone away, and because you have longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" I'd like to know who these gods were. Then Jacob replied to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. The one with whom you found your gods shall not live in the presence of our relatives. Point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. It's interesting. Jacob gives the reason for stealing them, but then doesn't know who stole them or why they stole them, and goes to the point of cursing that person with ultimate death. What? Okay. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two slave women, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddlebag, and she sat on them. So Laban searched through all the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "May my lord not be angry that I cannot stand in your presence, because the way of woman is upon me." So she searched, but did not. So he searched, but did not find the household items. The way of women is upon me. So apparently, it is, as they say colloquially, that time of the month for her. Her menstrual cycle is flowing, and she uses that to keep him from finding it. But then Jacob becomes angry and argues with Laban and says to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you've hotly pursued me?" Which I thought that was already out on the table, but now it's just like, nah, since you didn't find the stolen items, then nothing you said mattered anymore. These are just, I mean, it's just horrible people. This is how horrible people argue. "Though you have searched all of my property, what have you found of all your household property? Set it here in front of my relatives and your relatives, so that they may decide between the two of us." For these 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten the rams of your flocks. I did not even bring to you that which was torn by wild animals. I took the loss myself. You demanded it of my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. This is how I was by the day. The heat consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. For these 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your two daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. Now, again, we know that God did none of these things because we absolutely know how Jacob orchestrated this whole idea. That's what we saw in Genesis chapter 30. Then Laban replied to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my grandchildren, the flocks are my flocks, and everything that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these daughters of mine or to their children to whom they have given birth? So now come, let's make the covenant, you and I, and it shall be a witness between you and me. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a memorial stone. I want to know more about these memorial stones. Jacob said to his relatives, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Now Laban called it Jagar Sadurta. Okay, whatever. But Jacob called it Galid. Interesting. Let me just go over this real quick. Heap of the witness in Hebrew. Okay. There it is. Laban says this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore, it was named Galid. Now that's interesting. Laban calls it one thing, Jacob calls it another thing, but then Laban calls it what Jacob calls it. And Mitzpah, for he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are absent one from the other. Which there are many churches who still say this as a part of their benediction. I was not a part of a lot of those churches, but quite a few of my colleagues were. May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from the other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is with us between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold the memorial stone, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness. Now, I don't know how the heap can be a witness. I've never understood these aspects of scripture. We're just going to put up a heap of stuff and bam, let this be a witness. Now, if you say, let this be a memorial, let this be a monument, but a witness, maybe that's what it is, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass this heap and this memorial to stone me, a memorial stone to me for harm. And so basically it's a boundary, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father judged between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his relatives to the meal, and they ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Then early in the morning, Laban got up and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. I'm really glad we got through that chapter because I would have hated to have spent an entire episode on that chapter next week. So I'm glad we made it that far, which means next week we'll be able to pick up with Genesis chapter 32, which does bring in some more interesting stories with Jacob's fear of Esau. And so we will have some fun there. Just kind of recapping from some of the things that we pulled from Genesis chapter 30 and Genesis chapter 31. Leah got her groove back in chapter 29 and then let it completely go in chapter 30. Rachel was very vindictive and combative, antagonistic towards her sister. Both of these women then violate the rights of other women and take babies from them in this competition towards each other. God eventually steps in the story and actually allows Rachel to have a baby, only after these other women have been grossly violated once by having someone else thrust upon them, and violated twice by having to actually bring to term that person's child, and then violated thrice by then having that child yanked away from them. Just wow. And then we get to Jacob's kind of redemption arc, at least in his story with Laban, where he finally gets free by literally orchestrating, you know, what we know by modern terms to be a scheme, a scam, you know, Ponzi like, runs this entire scheme and then lies to his wife about running the scheme in the same way that his mother does, in the same way that his father's mother does, but lies about this scheme to say that no, God did all of this. I didn't do any of this. God is actually the one who did this, which unfortunately becomes the behavior of many people who attach themselves to the Bible. Is that no, I didn't do any of these things. God did this. God made all of these things happen. I wasn't the one being all, vindictive and combative and antagonistic and oppressive. All of these things were the will of God. And then also, just as another recap, as I mentioned through these stories, you also see this very strong line of prosperity and this correlation between trickery, prosperity, or treachery, prosperity, and God's approval, or at least being God's name being invoked as approval. And I like to remind people that God he's a character in this book. He's not an author in this story. So we don't know if that character is absolutely being portrayed fairly, you know. And this is coming from the atheist. It would be the atheist who'd have to let you know that your God may not being portrayed fairly in that book, So, and for those of you who are true believers, I mean that in no way disrespectfully. One of the things that I encourage true believers to do is to find evidence for your belief. Um, that's that's the greatest way to validate your belief, to validate your experience, and to save yourself from some very real psychological harm that can come from not having those attachments, those groundings. Um, and I mean that sincerely. But that's all I have for now. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, this segment, whatever we're calling these things. I for certainly enjoy doing these things. I'll of course will be with you in the chat once this premieres. If you haven't already, like the videos, subscribe to the channel. Consider joining our community either through Patreon, Discord, or through the YouTube membership program. Consider volunteering our community in our community. You can do that through the forms in our description or through our website, www.dldd.us. I'm DL, DaranteLaMar. My wife is Darnea Doris. That's our website. Consider financially supporting. There's a lot of ways you can do it. Super chats, super thanks. I just found out that was a thing. Patreon, YouTube membership program. And we also have some links that you can give through in the chat. And of course, anything that you give towards us is tax deductible. We're nonprofit like that. I think I like the way that comes across. We're nonprofit like that. We also have merch. Feel free to check that out. And of course, feel free to join us on some of our Sunday sessions. We're having a lot of fun, having some secular conversations, building secular community. And also feel free to join us in Discord. All right. I think that's everything I have. I love y'all, man. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. I'll holler.